Imagine this. A Roman emperor, Caligula, orders his horse to be made a priest. No, this isn't a joke. This actually happened. And that's just the beginning. Today, we're looking into some of the most bizarre, ridiculous, and downright funny orders ever given by kings and politicians. From bearded taxes to banning certain foods, you won't believe what these powerful figures thought was a good idea. Let's dive in. This is a history lesson you won't forget. First up, let's talk about Peter the Great of Russia. He wanted to modernize Russia, bring it in line with the stylish, clean-shaven ways of Western Europe. But you know what stood in his way? Beards. Peter hated those beards so much that he decided on a drastic measure, a beard tax. Men of Russia, if you wanted to keep your beloved facial hair, you had to pay up. Imagine that, budgeting for your beard. And if you couldn't pay, well, you'd face the dreaded public shave. Peter even had special beard tokens made that you had to carry around as proof of payment. Talk about a close shave with history. Next, we travel back in time to ancient Egypt. Pharaoh Pepi II really hated flies. His solution? Covering his slaves in honey. The idea was that the flies would swarm the honey-coated individuals, leaving the pharaoh himself blissfully fly-free. Can you imagine? Talk about being stuck in a sticky situation. And then there's Caligula, the Roman emperor who practically wrote the textbook on bizarre rulers. Today, we're focusing on his unusual fondness for his horse, Incitatus. Caligula wanted to make him a senator. He had a custom stable built for Incitatus, complete with marble floors and ivory mangers. Imagine, a horse in the Roman Senate. They say Roman politics were a circus, but this is ridiculous. Speaking of strange leadership, let's head north to Denmark and talk about King Christian VII. Christian had a bit of a reputation for eccentric behavior. One of his most peculiar orders involved soldiers marching like chickens during parades. Imagine the scene, rows of stern-faced soldiers decked out in their finest uniforms, clucking and flapping their arms like a flock of confused poultry. I'm not sure what's funnier, the image of it or the thought of the poor soldier who had to teach everyone how to cluck convincingly. Now, let's hop over to England and discuss King George III, a man of many quirks. One of his most notable oddities was his intense dislike for a particular word, majestic. So, what did he do? He banned it. Imagine the tiptoeing around that word, courtiers stumbling over their compliments, desperately searching for synonyms that wouldn't send the king into a tizzy. Your, super greatness, your impressiveness of grand proportions. It must have been a linguistic minefield. Let's stick with animals for a bit, shall we? This time, we're in 18th century France, where a nobleman decided to tackle a very real problem, rats. Rats were everywhere, overrunning homes, businesses, you name it. So this nobleman came up with a solution, a cat decree. Every household, he declared, must have a cat. Cats are excellent at catching rats, so it seemed like a logical solution. But, as with many well-intentioned plans, things didn't quite go as expected. People started blaming their cats for everything. It got so bad that the nobleman had to issue a second decree, this time cancelling the first one. The cats, I'm sure, were relieved. Now, let's talk about Napoleon Bonaparte. Military genius, Emperor of France, and a big fan of canned food? Well, sort of. Napoleon wanted to make sure his troops were well fed, even on long campaigns. So he offered a hefty prize to anyone who could come up with a way to preserve food for his armies. A French chef named Nicolas Appert won the prize with his innovative method of sealing food in glass jars. But the reality was that canned food, especially back then, wasn't exactly known for its culinary delights. Instead of the gourmet feasts Napoleon probably imagined, his soldiers ended up eating a lot of bland preserved rations. So much for the myth of fresh food. For our next story, we travel to 15th century England, where King Henry IV was facing a bit of a culinary conundrum. The problem wasn't a lack of food, but rather a desire to control what people ate, specifically on Mondays. Henry decided that Mondays should be meat-free, so Henry issued a decree no meat pies on Mondays. The reason? To encourage people to eat more fish, which was seen as a healthier and more readily available option. Can you imagine the Monday blues hitting extra hard with the absence of a comforting meat pie? Now, let's journey to Japan, where we meet Tokugawa Tsunayoshi, the 5th shogun of the Edo period. Tsunayoshi had a bit of a soft spot for animals. He issued a series of laws that gave animals, especially dogs, more rights than people. Harming a dog, even accidentally, could land you in serious trouble, possibly even facing the death penalty. Imagine living in a society where you had to be more careful about bumping into a dog than another human being. Talk about a dog-eat-dog world, literally. Now, we're moving into more recent history with Enver Hoxha, the communist leader of Albania. Hoxha was known for his strict rule, but one of his most baffling decisions involved television. In the 1970s, while the rest of the world was embracing color TV, Hoxha decided that this new technology was a dangerous capitalist influence. So, while families in neighboring countries were enjoying the colorful world of television, Albanians were stuck with the grainy black and white broadcasts. Speaking of communist leaders with unusual anxieties, let's talk about Nicolae Ceausescu of Romania. Ceausescu's fear fixated on something seemingly innocuous: Scrabble. He believed that the game's emphasis on words, strategy, and critical thinking could potentially incite rebellion against his regime. Imagine that, a world where a simple board game could land you in hot water with the authorities. Ceausescu's ban on Scrabble is a stark reminder that even the most seemingly harmless activities can be perceived as threats by those in power. Who knew Scrabble could be so subversive? Our next stop takes us to Cuba, where Fidel Castro made a bold move in the realm of beverages. Before Castro's revolution, Cuba was a haven for American products, including Coca-Cola. But Castro, in his quest to break free from American influence, banned Coca-Cola. He replaced it with a homegrown alternative. The problem was, according to many Cubans, it tasted, well, not so great. Some described it as having a rather medicinal flavor. Let's travel back in time to medieval England, where King Edward IV was not just a ruler, but also a bit of a fashion critic. And his target? Short jackets. Edward found these fashionable garments to be, well, not very manly. He preferred the look of long, flowing robes and tunics. So what did he do? He banned them. Men of England were forbidden from sporting these trendy short jackets. Imagine being arrested for your sartorial choices. For our next tale, we venture to 16th century China, where the Ming Emperor decided to beat the summer heat in a rather unconventional way. He decided to build an ice palace, a massive, opulent structure made entirely of ice, right in the middle of his summer palace grounds. Imagine the logistics of this. Huge blocks of ice, transported from frozen lakes and rivers, painstakingly carved and assembled to create this frozen wonderland. All this just so the emperor could escape the heat for a few hours. Let's return to France, where King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, reigned supreme. Louis XIV was known for his lavish court and his particular tastes. One of his more unusual decrees involved footwear, specifically pointy shoes. Louis found these pointy shoes to be downright ugly, so he banned them. Imagine the scramble among the courtiers to find shoes that wouldn't offend the king's delicate sensibilities. Now, you might think that these bizarre decrees are a thing of the past, relics of a bygone era of eccentric rulers. But you'd be wrong. Even in the 21st century, we have examples of leaders issuing rather interesting orders. Take, for instance, the case of a certain European leader who issued a decree about bananas. He wanted them straight. No curves, no bends, just perfectly straight bananas. Imagine that. A world where the curvature of your fruit could become a matter of government regulation. Sometimes rulers throughout history have gone to great lengths to celebrate their victories. But Tsar Alexander I of Russia took celebrations to a whole new level. We're talking about a 300-year party. You might think that a 300-year party would be in honor of some monumental victory. But the battle that Alexander I was celebrating was a loss. Talk about putting a positive spin on things. And finally, let's end our journey through history's most bizarre orders with a trip back to the United States during the Prohibition era. Prohibition was a time when the sale and consumption of alcohol were illegal. But one of the most creative loopholes involved medicinal whiskey. Doctors were allowed to prescribe whiskey to their patients for a variety of ailments. Unsurprisingly, this led to a surge in prescriptions for medicinal whiskey. People who had never had a sip of alcohol in their lives were suddenly coming down with mysterious illnesses that could only be cured by a stiff drink. From taxing beards to making horses priests, history is full of ridiculous moments that show even the most powerful leaders can be hilariously out of touch. Which of these stories made you laugh the most? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating and funny stories from the past. Until next time, keep laughing and stay curious.